The day my son surprised me in the most unexpected way started like any other quiet morning. The kind that feels ordinary until you look back and realize it changed everything. I woke up before the sun, the house still wrapped in that familiar silence that comes after years of raising children and watching them grow into lives of their own. The coffee maker hummed in the kitchen, and I stood by the window, staring at the faint glow of dawn, thinking about how fast time had moved. It felt like only yesterday I was tying his shoes, and now he was a man with a life far beyond these walls. My son, Ethan, had always been independent. From the time he was young, he carried a sense of responsibility that both amazed and worried me. After his mother passed away, something in him hardened in quiet ways. He didn't rebel or fall apart. Instead, he stepped forward, helping around the house, taking care of things he shouldn't have had to worry about at that age. I tried my best to shield him from the weight of adulthood, but grief has a way of changing people early. As the years went on, we grew close in a way that didn't always need words. We weren't the kind of family that said, "I love you," every 5 minutes, but it lived in everything we did. In shared meals, in late-night talks, in the way he'd call just to ask if I'd eaten. Still, as he built his own life, I began to feel something I hadn't expected: loneliness. Not the aching kind, but the quiet kind that sneaks in when the house no longer echoes with footsteps. That morning, I had no idea Ethan was coming over. He hadn't called, and I assumed he was busy with work like always. I spent the early hours fixing a loose cabinet hinge, pretending I wasn't avoiding the silence. By mid-morning, the sun filled the living room, warming old furniture and memories alike. That's when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so the sound startled me. When I opened the door and saw Ethan standing there, holding a small smile I hadn't seen in years, my heart skipped. He looked different, not physically, but in the way his eyes held something gentle and sure, like he was carrying good news but wanted to deliver it carefully. He stepped inside and hugged me without saying a word. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was the kind of hug that lingers, the kind that makes you realize how much you needed it. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. We sat in the living room, the same room where he'd done homework at the coffee table and fallen asleep during old movies. He looked around like he was seeing it all for the first time. Then he told me he wanted to take me somewhere. No explanation. Just a request, spoken softly, like it mattered more than he was letting on. I didn't ask questions. I trusted him. We got into his car, and as he drove, memories poured through my mind. I remembered teaching him how to drive on empty roads, my hands clenched, pretending not to be nervous. Now he drove with confidence, glancing at me every so often, smiling like he was making sure I was okay. We drove farther than I expected, past familiar streets and into parts of town I hadn't visited in years. When we finally stopped, I realized where we were. It was the old lakeside park where his mother and I used to go when we were young. The place where we'd dreamed about the future, where I'd once brought Ethan as a baby, pointing at the water like he could understand the importance of it all. My throat tightened as I stepped out of the car. Ethan walked beside me, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders relaxed. He told me he remembered coming here with me after his mother passed, how we'd sat in silence, feeding ducks, not knowing how to talk about the pain. He said that day had stayed with him his entire life. Then he did something I never expected. He told me he had bought a small house nearby. Not for himself. For me. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but his expression didn't change. He explained that he'd noticed how tired I was, how much I still carried alone. He said he wanted me to have a place filled with peace, with light, with a view of the water where memories could soften instead of hurt. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever done something like that for me. I'd spent my whole life being the one who provided, who protected, who sacrificed. I never imagined my son would grow into someone who saw me so clearly. We walked to the house together. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was perfect. Sunlight poured through the windows, and the air smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. I stood in the middle of the living room, overwhelmed by gratitude and love I couldn't put into words. Ethan told me he wanted this to be my next chapter. A place where I could rest, where mornings could be quiet without being lonely. He said loving someone meant making sure they were cared for, even when they pretended they didn't need it. I realized then that this was romance in its purest form. Not the kind found in movies or grand gestures meant to impress, but the deep, unwavering love between a parent and child, shaped by years of shared struggle and quiet strength. We sat on the small porch overlooking the lake, watching the water ripple under the afternoon sun. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not as a role or a responsibility, but as a person who deserved happiness. That night, after he dropped me back home, I lay awake thinking about how love changes shape over time, how it begins as protection, grows into partnership, and eventually becomes gratitude and respect. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of lightness. I packed a small bag and drove back to the lake house. I made coffee in a new kitchen, watched the sunrise over the water, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The day my son surprised me in the most unexpected way wasn't about a house or a gift. It was about realizing that love, when given freely and patiently, always finds its way back. And sometimes it comes from the people you least expect, at the exact moment you need it most.